pled guilty, ended up getting 25 years, 5 25-year sentences run concurrent. So it's 25 years, but I still say it's 125 years because they tried to stack that initially.
How much time did you actually do in prison?
17 years. So I currently work for the Harris County Public Defender's Office, the same place that I was convicted at, the same jail that I was in. I have a badge that I just swipe and I get into jails and I go and visit the men and women and just do my best to encourage them. I was born in San Antonio. My first memories were of South Oak Cliff, Prince Hall Apartments, so very, very tough environment. Saw my first man get killed at 7 years old. Saw somebody try to rape my mother at 7. That was like in a 1 or 2 week period. And that caused us to go back to San Antonio and be in other tough situations where I remember being around people that had escaped from the psych ward, and the person was sitting on the couch next to me, and there's literally a manhunt going on the news. Stuff like that. You know, I've experienced some unique stuff, and by the grace of God, like I wasn't ever snatched up or anything like that. Got in a lot of trouble as a kid, went to 7 different elementaries between Houston, Dallas, San Antonio. I always wanted to be the funny kid. Got in trouble, but I always wanted to be the class clown. Like I got an award 1 year for being class clown, and I held it high. Mm-hmm. But I always smart. I always in the elevated classes, doing those things. And got to Southwest Houston, man, and just started around 13, 14, just started selling crack. I had crack in my hand at 11. I remember that. And just started selling crack, man.
What time period was this? Late 90s, mid 90s?
No, early 90s. This was 91, 90, 91, 92, 93, because I got incarcerated in 93.
Okay.
At 16, yeah. So I went through that process.
But I was in Oak Cliff in 91.
It was Oak Cliff in 91. No, so back then in Oak Cliff, that was 80.
Okay.
Yeah. That was 81. That's when the Jamaicans came through and all this stuff. Yeah, it was kind of crazy just to see it. But hear the stories later, because I never knew why it was so violent. Mm-hmm. And the guys in prison said, "Man, you was there, so you remember this?" No, I don't remember. But this is what happened. So they told me the story of what I was living in, and I never knew.
Yeah. So
just going through that process, was arrested for 4 crimes that I didn't do and 1 crime that I did. Pled guilty, ended up getting 25 years, 5 25-year sentences run concurrent. So it's 25 years, but I still say it's 125 years because they tried to stack that initially.
Oh, wow.
So they tried to stack me with 100 or 150 years. So I still, to people that know, I say 25, but still in my heart, that's what kind of drove me. They tried to give me 125 years.
Yeah.
So just was going through that process as a kid, trying to figure out. I had an excellent mother, but just my environment. I kind of went to my environment. I wanted to go to the NFL. I love football, but just I couldn't stand up under those pressures, and never wanted to be like a rapper or anything like that, like the kids today. But these opportunities were here to make money from selling drugs, and I saw guys I've been knowing since 5th, 6th grade, literally. I'm driving cars, you know?
Yeah.
Like, wow.
Yeah. It's hard for our moms to keep us from that when it's all around us.
Exactly.
There were a number of times just being outside on the steps with my friends who we were 12 and 13, but they're one time in particular just skitzed out on coke, and I'm in 7th grade, 8th grade. Just it was not normal in the sense that I would do it, because I knew that it was wrong and it was dangerous, but it was normal in the sense that that's just what was going on in junior high.
Yeah.
But it is hard for our moms to keep us from that, no matter how tough they are. As soon as we walk out that door, the pressure of the world and the environment, especially when we're young, seems to have much more, or puts much more pressure on us than whatever's going on inside of the home.
Exactly.
And in my case in particular, I was trying to get out of the house all the time.
Yeah.
So the streets were just out there available and have a lot more influence on my life. How much time did you actually do in prison?
17 years.
17?
Yes.
And while you were there, you got some education, but was there a certain turning point, like a pivotal moment or several, some point where you began to realize that you wanted to get involved in education and change up what you were doing?
I really always give credit to my grandma and grandpa. My grandma was the first ever black principal on the affluent side of San Antonio, and my grandpa was the first ever ROTC professor at UTSA. So when I would look at myself and figure like, man, the last grade I completed was 8th grade. So go get a GED, because my grandma was about education, my grandpa was about education. So I was able to kind of go back and lean on my family history because I didn't feel like I had a good history myself. And so once I got my GED, I had an opportunity to get into college, Alvin Community College. And it was just to do something initially, just to be a part of making myself feel better. But then at one point it just clicked, and I wanted to get better grades. I got a trade. I really started diving in a lot more. So the focus was kind of outside of myself, like look at my stock, look at who I came from, because I felt like I didn't come from much, and just kind of just dove in education a lot more.
That's a similar story, not only to my own, but someone else I was talking to the other day who was inspired more or less by his family.
Mm-hmm.
How old were you during this time?
When I got my GED, I was maybe 17, because I got incarcerated at 16. So maybe 17 or maybe 18, right at 18 when I got my GED.
And my grandmother was actually one of my major inspirations for the education. So some of these books we were talking about earlier,
Yeah.
Some of these books, the older ones that are falling apart like roots down there, those come from her because she was one who didn't get a chance to go to college or anything, but was personally motivated to educate herself in just a wide variety of areas. And so when I went to prison and decided I wanted to focus on education, she was really, sort of my inspiration as well.
Right.
So you did your GED and then Alvin Community College?
Community College. Yeah, I enrolled at about 19. I got blessed to get off the place I was at and ended up going to Central Unit. So got in at 19. And when I finished, I had 100, I think it was 130 some credits, because I continued to go. It was the Youthful Offender Program. So I just took class on class on class, and I just went to as many classes as I could.
I think I'm seeing a pattern
Yes.
in some of the people that I talk to, because I was on the youth offender grant also, and I walked out of prison with 128 hours.
Yes.
So you beat me. I haven't met many who would beat me on that, but I didn't have a lot of time, so I couldn't do the bachelor's program. So I just kept racking up credits, and so that's funny. You're the third person. We all have a similar story, going in as teenagers, getting into college, using the youthful offender grant, and just racking up crazy amount of hours. Yeah. So during your education, were there moments in classes or maybe in things you were doing outside of class that were noteworthy to change your perspective or enlighten you? Was there anything like that going on in the homework and the assignments in college? Or was that something that you were, studying outside school?
Yes, mine was poetry, the English classes. Frank Smith was our professor. I still remember him to this day, and Mr. Ernst was our fourth class. But yeah, it taught us about poetry, but it taught us about Greek mythology, going back to the beginning, and just that there was a process to everything. Because you think that you see a poem and all you see is a poem, the end result. But it taught us about the process of writing and creating. And then that was able to help me as I transitioned really after college, because I was able to continue to write certain things, and I continued to study. One thing that I did, which is wrong, I used to do the guys' homework. They knew that I liked poetry because I never turned the books in. I never turned out English books in. I always kept them. I read them for years afterwards, and they saw that. So guys would always come say, man, I'll pay you in soups, of course, if you write my paper. And I was like, yeah, give me some soups and I'll write your paper.
Right.
No.
Reginald Betts, have you heard of him?
No.
He served 6 or 7 years in prison, I want to say, and he is now a lawyer. He went to Yale. But one of in his story, what I've heard him talk about is poetry as well. One of the things that inspired him, that it really just caught on, was his interest in literature and poetry. And so he's published some books now of poetry, but he decided to pursue a law degree.
Mm-hmm.
Literature in particular is one of those things I think we all come to realize its value when we are stuck in prison, some of us for the first time discovering books and literature.
True.
So that's interesting that poetry was one for you. I was never great at poetry. And there were many people that I did know who, I don't know where it comes from, you know.
For me, it was just the fact of learning that there's a process. You know, seeing it from beginning to end. Also learning the poet's story. Like mine became, my favorite poet was JaDonne, the metaphysical poet. And just knowing his story and then seeing the poetry that he wrote, because he wrote 2 poems. He either wrote about God or he wrote about love. Those were the only 2 topics that he ever covered. So just being able to see him and have the professor explain that, but then I also see the professor say, I think you are like this a little bit more. So to be in prison, to be young, and to have the professor take a special interest and to say, I think you're like his poet, because he saw me taking a liking to it, but then he also saw through his experiences, probably not in prison, but just through his training, that he saw like this guy has an interest. So I read and I learned about JaDonne and of course others. And what also got me was the Greek mythology, like the Greek mythology, like going from the beginning, Oedipus Rex, like, and understanding there was a process in everything. Understanding epic poems. So for me, it opened my eyes up to a lot more because those poets kind of helped build the world foundation of how you learn and philosophy and other things too. So it was a start, but it was like a portal to more.
The Greek and Roman mythology didn't strike me at first, but once I got into philosophy, it really became valuable to me in learning about who Socrates, Plato, Aristotle were, and their ideas, and putting that in the context of the Greek mythology, because they're constantly making reference to, you know, the gods and fate and just the pantheon of deities. So I have a real appreciation for it, only insofar as it helps me understand ancient Greek philosophy of Socrates and Aristotle. Of course, I love ancient, you know, like the Greek and Roman movies too, like 300.
I watch it every time they come on.
So Greek mythology, Roman mythology. Were there any other subjects of poetry and Greek mythology?
So when I finished, that was the thing. I wanted to read. We were talking earlier about roots. So I went on a Black history study, and I went to the library and I got as many books as I could. And I read Roots and Queen. Queen is my favorite book by Alex Haley. Queen is the follow-up to Roots. I read the Zora Neale Hurstons. I read about the Egyptian guys from the beginning. Not the Egyptian guys, but the Egyptian dynasties. Read about the dynasties and how many dynasties, and saw the correlation between the Egyptian dynasties in history and also what was about Egypt in the Bible and how it coincided, just like kind of blew my mind. And just went through Color Purple. I mean, even though I saw the movie 1,000 times, just went through reading those books. So I wanted a Black history study so I could understand like Black literature, because that also went to W.B. Du Bois, who I've always had trouble reading the Tale of the Ten. I still haven't read it to this day. I started like 4 times. But it's so deep to me, and I think I'm trying too hard. But Booker T. Washington, Frederick Douglass, understanding those and pulling speeches from him and pulling the way that I approach situations. And this was 400 years ago. But just being able to understand that these individuals, Black men, Black women, had intelligence way back then, because as a kid going into the system, I didn't know that. Like, I knew NWA, you know, I knew Get Up Boys. So with being able to see another part of literature and people able to express themselves that weren't Black gave me a better sense of me, because I wanted to write, I wanted to create. So now I have Get Up Boys and NWA, but I also have Zora Neale Hurston and Alex Haley.
Yeah, I was introduced to Du Bois when I was taking my college courses also, just little snippets of some of his writing. And so here in the last few years, I tried to read The Souls of Black Folk, and I listened to it at first, and it was too much. I don't know how to say it. It was poetic. It was
something.
It was beyond what I could understand, and so I thought, okay, well, let me try to read it. Let me try to visualize it. I could take my time through the words. Probably got about maybe 2 chapters, and I just like, okay, this is not something I can take in right now.
I was like, you have to be on a certain spiritual plane. I know people that read it, but I think for us, because we truly want to understand, we kind of want to be placed at that time. and for whatever reason, we may have too much going on. But yeah, he is a person that if you get into his book, I still haven't picked it up in 15 years. I tried 4 times to read, and I never could read it. And I think I honored it that much to say, let me give it some more time.
Which can happen. That's happened to me very specifically with one of these books around here somewhere called The Wound of Knowledge. Of course, when we were in prison and we were like 19 or 20 years old and it's 105 degrees and sweat's dripping down your arms on the pages, that's a completely different context to try and understand some of these ideas. And if we do, then that's a testament, to our perseverance and our ambition in trying to understand it. Because I remember reading that book, The Wound of Knowledge, sitting on the floor, sweating. I couldn't understand it. It's too many words. And I just put it away. And I didn't read it through the whole time I was in prison after that. But I've since then looked at it now, and it's not that big of a deal. But it wasn't that it was necessarily like conceptually difficult. I just didn't understand the vocabulary, the jargon. And now years later, I'm able to pick it up and understand it well. But not DuBose, not yet.
Not yet, me either.
But his ideas are really popular in a different way now with people like Derek Bell in the news, who the trajectory of their ideas comes from someone like DuBose 120 years ago. So how old were you when you got out?
33. So I'm 16 to 33.
So you finished your education pretty quick, and then there was some time in between finishing?
Yeah, I did the trade, horticulture trade, and went on to study. But I also, I was kind of deep I was deep into the church. I started understanding the church better, so I studied the Bible as best as I could. Had the preachers, the individuals that came in, the mentors, and then the men that were, I guess, preachers or understood the Bible before they got incarcerated, because I was a kid, so I never read the Bible before I got incarcerated. So I studied the Bible, became a leader in the church, one of the 3 leaders, and learned and taught there as best I could. I told them I'm not a preacher, I'm a servant. So the other guys were more so preachers, and I understood that my role as a servant meant that I connected with the gang members more, I connected with the hustlers more, because I came from that. So like Paul always said, to the Gentiles be a Gentile, to the Jew be a Jew. So to the Crips, I was a Crip. To the Bloods, I was a Blood. To the white supremacists, I wasn't a white supremacist, but I was able to speak to them when they came with issues, And then did the Toastmaster. Of course, I became the first Toastmaster president of a Gavel Club, the second Toastmaster president overall in TDC, and went through that and learned how to teach and speak and raise up other men in those situations, and did the prisoner for a day, where the men would come in that were on probation. So not the kids, but the grown guys, and did the prisoner for a day. But everything was a teaching process. Like, I wanted you to learn. I could holler at you, because I didn't holler at first, but a guy was like, you gotta holler and break them down. And when I holler, my voice cracks. I'm not that tough. So I would do that, but it had to be like a teaching process. And in those situations, you have to learn how to teach quickly. So you can attest, it's being a professor, being an educator, that sometimes you have to go about things a little bit different. So my focus was, after college, to just continue. How do I continue to build myself for this potential release? And it was just diving in and writing and poetry and doing other things. I just had to feed myself, listening to radio, listening to the Republicans, which I knew nothing about, Democrats, which I knew nothing about, but listening to the NPRs and the Rush Limbaughs and the Savages, but listening to everybody else too, to just understand it a little bit more. So I just wanted to educate and be educated on as many levels as I could.
Yeah, I never was interested in politics pretty much at all. The irony is that I was interested in the study of religion, so I started off with comparative world religions and studied Islam and Buddhism and every kind of Christianity there was, until I found Christian apologetics. But in doing that, I never really was interested in understanding the political order or government. It was only until like 5 years ago that I began to make a conscious effort to understand what's going on with our political system and the government. So that's been, I think, rather unique in just spending my whole life not caring at all, and then in the last 5 years trying to figure out what is happening, what is going on. But yeah, for me, it was mostly religious studies and philosophical studies in prison. So, were there experiences or there things that, looking back in hindsight about the system, the conditions?
One that a lot of people don't talk about is medical, actually. I saw a guy, I still remember his name, Damion, Jewish guy from New York, healthy, worked out every day, never ate out of the chow hall, never, only ate tuna. And we were working out. I had got to the point, I was a big guy, but I was doing pull-ups. So him and I were doing pull-ups at early morning rec, and he came to me and he said, "Man, look, I have these bruises under his nails and all over through his body." And he was like, I don't know, And literally 30 something hours later, he was dead from some sort of cancer. Healthy, never ate out of the child the whole time we were incarcerated. Other guys that got out and passed away, the rate of cancer that was increasing in prison. It was something that was always scary to me once I saw it happening more and more and more because of the food, because of the conditions. That's something that people still to this day, and I've been home 11 years, that you don't hear about it. You hear about the air conditioning, you hear about everything else, but they don't talk about the medical access or actually preventive medication, preventive things that you can do. That's one thing that scared me more so than the riots and everything else, because that's sneaky. You can't prepare for that. You can't prepare your family, for that. How do you prepare to know that you have to fight a battle of cancer at a prison hospital? And as soon as you go through your stuff, you have to come back to the prison and get sick and go back to the hospital, or get out and you die. Literally, I've known guys got out and have died 2-3 months after release. Because of something that happened in prison, and it's scary.
Yeah.
Scary.
Yeah, I have seen that personally. Someone, his name was Tiger from Galveston, bled out everywhere. He didn't know, he hadn't been in a fight or anything. It was just a sort of graphic situation, and the officers saw it but didn't respond initially until his cellie and other people made a big noise about it. But it was like a Saturday or something, and the nurses weren't there, and they told him to wait until Monday, and he's bleeding. And so that was the first time I had encountered how the medical care in there, and this was 17 years ago at this point. It was my first time, just seeing how dangerous it could be if you're someone who has a lot of medical needs. I was young and I didn't really have a lot of medical issues, so it wasn't a big deal to me. But for some of the older guys or just those who are sick, it was a dangerous situation. One of the problems I think there is trying to prove that you actually have a problem.
Exactly.
When their natural disposition is to assume that you're lying or exaggerating or just trying
drink water.
Trying to get into the infirmary or something like that.
Take time.
Right.
I used to
cold busters.
cold busters. I used to fake. Now I was probably one of the people that got the nurses thinking like that. I was a kid, and I would literally fake passing out. I would fake asthma attacks. I didn't want to go to the fields, and I would have the.
You're the reason.
Yeah, I had a bag. I had a bag with the breathing treatments, and I did have asthma as a kid.
Yeah.
So I would literally fake, and I would go in there. They would put me on the bag and stuff like that. I faked and passed out one time. But I kept getting up, like waiting on the nurse. I kept going to my cell, like, where is she at? Man, why she ain't came yet? So I sometimes, you understand, but nevertheless, if there's a issue with a person that is sick, and especially when they don't know about themselves, your Hippocratic oath or whatever it has to be, like you should take care of this person. But because the medical is a part of the security system, the security system overrides everything, and security influences medical. And that's always going to happen because security is the system. TDC is the governing system. So TDC is going to influence medical, is going to influence parole, is going to influence everything else. So the security system actually influences the other elements of the system. So when people ask me, what's the change? I expect no change. I never have expected a change for the system, if you ask me, because the system has to break itself down and rebuild itself. And the security is needed, but why does it have to be so influential where it affects the medical, to where medical disregards their purpose to serve and heal somebody.
Well, since you've been out, so you've been out now how long? 11 years?
11 years this month.
And what were some of the challenges you faced, coming out of prison in terms of job or housing or anything like that? Some of the collateral consequences of what they're called. What kind of challenges did you face upon release?
My approach was different. I had a plan, and I followed the plan to a T. People used to ask me, was I Muslim? Because I was so focused. Not saying nothing wrong with the Christians or anybody else, but they were like, man, you Muslim. I was focused, man. I had a plan, and I followed that plan to a T. I was patient. My first job came from going to Workforce Solutions. The person that hired me, I'm still connected to them to this day. My first job in my life was at 33. So they saw my progress. They still consult with me. And then I just took other jobs that could progress me to whatever the next level was going to be. I didn't reach for jobs. So jobs wasn't a problem for me because I had no expectations. And that's one thing that people have to understand about me, why my path was different. I expected to do what was before me. I didn't have super long-term goals. I got in school because I knew that I needed some backing. I didn't have training. I didn't have years of work or education. So I went to U of H and graduated from U of H. But what happened was the issues, and I was talking to somebody, Lakeisha, I was talking to her today about it, relationships, because our relationships in prison and in the streets, if we don't want to work with you, whatever work means, just shut it down. Like, save your life and you go over there, and I save my life and I'm over here, and then we can be cohabitable in a certain situation. So relationships with women, certain families, certain friends, business relationships, because coming out of prison, you wanna serve, you wanna prove that you belong, so you always overextend yourself. And so that was a big issue for me. And housing came, I bought my house, but when I sold my house, I had an issue. I had been a homeowner for 5 years. So I had apartments, I was in an apartment, I bought a house, I sold a house, and I couldn't get an apartment.
Right. Yeah.
I've been home for 7, 8, 9 years. Probably I think this time it was like 9 years.
Yep.
And I couldn't get I no longer wanted to buy. I wanted to downgrade. And it was difficult. And luckily I found some place. But after that amount of time of owning a house and paying property taxes and school taxes and county taxes, I still couldn't get an apartment. I couldn't get a place.
Yeah, I had been out, I want to say 5 or 6 years ago, I was denied by like 6 apartments in a row.
Mm-hmm.
It was just a street that I was going down, it was a few miles from here. I just, drove and hit all of them. They all denied me, even though I'd already been out 8 or 9 years, something similar, had apartments in my name several times. At that point, I couldn't, and that was, I was thinking something similar in the sense that, like, at that time I had met Lieutenant Governor, Patrick and Whitmire. I had even met Perry, and I was doing all this stuff and working in TDCJ now as an ex-convict, but none of that matters to that manager that's sitting right there, going to make that decision. They don't know, they don't care, none about that. All they see is the background.
So I'm gonna tell you one thing I did though. I had to appeal to people.
Mm-hmm.
I don't want to tell you that I've been incarcerated, but I had to appeal to you because when I sold my house, finally after being on the market, I had to find somewhere to go. So I had to appeal to somebody. I came from a house with a yard. Like, I don't want to go, nothing against staying in the bad neighborhoods. I can go there, but I have an option. Like, I haven't stayed there in forever. So I had to appeal to people's interests and tell my story quickly. And I shouldn't have to tell you my life story to get an apartment. I should be judged by how I've lived out here and not something that happened literally 25, 26, 27 years ago.
Yeah, there should be some sort of time frame, window. That time frame or window might be the day we're released.
Mm-hmm.
If anything. I can understand people might want to see, some progress on the outside, but that's not what those rules are written for. They were not written because they were like, well, they should be out this long before we can trust them. They're just in there to literally bar anybody from getting in. that might be a potential liability. Here in Texas, there have been some laws passed to try and ease, like a landlord's ideas about what they are liable for, but nothing sweeping and transformative. The stigma is still there that renting, leasing to somebody with a felony is going to be a potential liability in the neighborhood or something like that. Like, that is something that's really unfortunate. Just like you said, I come armed with, like, I've done all these things.
Exactly. I got to prove, show you certificates.
I work in the prison. They done forgave me.
Exactly.
But
prove volunteer.
It don't matter. So it's an unfortunate thing that I do see things good on the horizon, but they're always slow. They're always slow. So what are you doing now? What have you been in the last few years? Because I did want to ask you about your conservative liberal show and the cognitive justice, but like leading up to that, what have you been up to?
I think my greatest monetary success was selling cars, man. I became a car salesman. I worked for Kia, and I was number 3 in Houston for 2 years. There are 2 guys that nobody ever beat. But I was number 3 in Houston for 2 years, man, selling Kias, top 40 in the nation for a couple years.
Did you have a problem there, like with your background? Because I've known a couple of guys who've done car sales.
Not at that dealership, because it was actually like my neighborhood. It was like a hood dealership.
Okay.
But those professional new dealership. But not at that particular dealership. And I think that's why I thrived, because I went in and as you know, like, we can see weaknesses in people. It's just something natural about us. It's our survival. So I saw weaknesses in the salespeople that you just want to get the basics. And I went in, and the story goes, I still was at U of H. And the guy that hired me said, man, well, how much money do you want to make? So I had already done my budget when I was getting ready to graduate.
You knew what you needed.
Yeah, I knew. I said $3,500. That's what I told him, $3,500. He said, okay. So those guys that were doing the bare minimum was making $5,000 a month. And so a year and a half later, I'm making $12,000 a month. And he came to me and he said, just this. He said, how does $3,500 look right now? I said, my bills are $3,500. Yeah. So it was the fact that I had somebody to invest in me. I got an opportunity. I went in with a suit. So they were like, man, who is this guy? I filled out the application. They said, have you ever been convicted of a felony and such and such? And I said, willing to discuss. Mm-hmm. And so the guy grabbed the application, he came around, he said, man, who put willing to discuss? He said, I went home and told my wife. So it was just those trainings that I had got from caravans and other places.
That's a common advice.
So car sales became very good at that, and just was the time. Though the money was there, the time. So I left, had an opportunity to do some radio stuff with KCOH Radio. And then got into nonprofit, man. And I think, though I had worked with some of my mentors before nonprofit, it was like perfect. It was like perfect. I became a community outreach lead for Sarah Jobs, one of the biggest workforce development agencies in the Gulf Coast, and I thrived. I thrived. I was in the community. I was making connections. I was learning about the services. I learned about our organization from the top to bottom, but I learned about the other organizations too, because I had already been volunteering with other organizations. So I had that opportunity, and through that, I figured I wanted to get back in school, so I researched school. I know I called you a few times. What should I do? I went from counselor to LPC to this, and I settled on project management. Now I can tell you, I settled on just getting my certifications, my Scrum Master, PMP, and all those other things. So went through that, and Anthony Graves, man. I was at an event and met Anthony Graves, got in his Smart Justice Speakers Bureau, received congressional recognition from Representative Al Green.
Is Anthony Graves the one who had been serving life for?
He served life.
I know the name.
No, not life, he was on death row.
Death row, okay.
He's exoneree 138, death row for 12 years with 2 execution dates for 6 murders that they later found out that he didn't commit. 18 years total. Walked out with an Emmy for the documentary about his life. Went to his training at TSU. Used to take my daughter on Saturdays so she can walk around and learn at TSU. And thrived in that opportunity, and went and we got some bills passed, wrote some bills between TSU, the ACLU. And then from that point on, we had a great relationship. And it got back to the point where I left SARE and worked around, bounced around. He called me and said, man, would you like an opportunity to come work for the Public Defender's Office? So I currently work for the Harris County Public Defender's Office, the same place that I was convicted at, the same jail that I was in. I have a badge that I just swipe and I get into jails and I go and visit the men and women and just do my best to encourage them, encourage their families. Our goal is to bring the families together, but I also provide, I'm like a conduit between the lawyers, the families, and defendant, so I can pass the information so the lawyers can focus on the many cases that they have.
Yeah. Isn't that interesting, being able to go in and out of the jails like that?
Yeah.
When I worked on Darrington, I had a set of keys that I would go into. Have you ever been on the Darrington unit? Yeah, so on the I don't know what it was like when you were there, but the education wing, that whole wing, that goes down to ODR, it's right next to it. I had a set of keys, and that was surreal to walk into this maximum security prison and ask for the keys that are mine and let people in.
So let me ask you this: do you think that the access that you had, that if you hadn't went through what you went through, everything, that you would have been prepared for that opportunity?
Right. I do think it meant more to me.
Exactly.
I think it would mean more to somebody who's experienced it from the other end, to not take it lightly, to do as much as you could with it. I remember talking to the warden at that time. She was only there for like 6 or 7 months. But when she retired, I told her, thank you for making me feel welcomed. Because the first time I was in there, I was just walking on eggshells. Like,
exactly.
Are they like reporting on me? Are they watching me through the cameras? You know what I'm saying? Are they talking about me? Like, that's that one dude.
Yeah, exactly.
I don't know what's going on. But she didn't have no problems with it, and it was great. And one of the parole commissioners, Lynn Ruzica, she came to see me while I was in prison, and I ended up making parole. And she came back there one day, and I knew who she was. She didn't recognize me. I'm just somebody. But she needed to do her parole visits. And they didn't have a space, and the prison was on lockdown. And the officer calls down the hallway, says, "Hey, can we use your library?" This officer asking me, "Can we use your library to do these parole interviews?" I was like, "Yeah, of course." I opened the door. I didn't say nothing to her. They did the parole interviews or whatever. And then afterwards, she came to me to say, she's done. And she wanted to know about the seminary, because she had heard a little bit about it. And she said, "Hi, my name is Lynn Ruzica." I said, "Yes, ma'am, I know who you are." She said, "How do you know who I am?" I said, "Well, you let me make parole 5-6 years ago." And her eyes lit up.
Yeah.
But she was also really cordial about it and appreciated it and wanted to give me her business card and things like that. So it was very surreal and momentous. So nonprofits is something that you really have been involved in, and also radio.
Yes.
What was the radio? Is communications? Maybe it was from your interest in poetry. How did you get into radio and communications?
It started at Caravans, actually. Guy Ed Fowler, who wrote for the Houston Chronicle, the Kansas City Tribune, I think, Chicago Tribune, Kansas City Telegram, and a couple other legendary sports guys. Ed Fowler, he was a mentor at Caravans, and he came in and we started the IFI Herald, and I started out just learning how to cut and paste and publish it. So we designed it and published it. And
I need your help on that.
And that's why I took Ed Caravans in prison, learning publisher, designed it. Then we learned all the aspects of making a publication. I eventually became the head editor, not the editor-in-chief, because that was Ed Fowler, who I met with probably about 5 months ago. And we just talked, and I've always loved radio. I stayed on the sports station. Still to this day, I stay on the sports station. On the radio, on TV, it doesn't matter. On the app, I'm still listening to sports and radio all day. And then went to U of H, and I wanted to do communication because I did a business plan for a magazine that still hasn't taken effect to this day. And I wanted to learn how to design. All I wanted to go to school, I didn't know. I thought it was like Alvin. I thought I can go and pick my classes.
Mm-hmm.
But at U of H, you got to follow a plan.
Yeah.
So I went in and I had to follow this plan. I went in for media production because I wanted to learn how to design the magazine on the outside. But then I started taking a lot of writing classes. Look at me writing again.
Mm-hmm.
And I switched over to I switched over to broadcast journalism for media production, and had an internship opportunity at ESPN Radio, which is Gal Media, or Comcast Sports. And so that morning, one of my classmates, which I didn't know, he was the intern coordinator at ESPN Radio, which was 1560 The Game, which was all the sports stations in Houston besides the AM station. And I went and he walked me around, I saw everything. And then that evening, I went to Comcast Sports downtown, and I was overwhelmed. I saw where Calvin Murphy was sitting there, this was the Rockets broadcast and all this other stuff. And I called the guy like, look, man, I'm coming to do radio. Because I was just overwhelmed.
Yeah.
And I loved it. So I stopped working. I only went to school and went to ESPN for like 6-7 months. Cutting, pasting, producing shows, live events. The All-Star game came that year. I got a pass to go to the House of Blues to see some of, like, this was Stuart Scott was still alive. I got to see all these guys. Dream. I mean, like a dream. And I got to learn under some people. But I learned radio. I didn't learn how to just do broadcast. I learned radio.
Mm-hmm.
So, and then went to do some internet stations. Ended up at KCOH doing some producing, recruiting for the people that own KCOH, and ended up getting my own show. And that's where the conservative liberal show started. Conservative liberal is a line from the rapper Bun B from the song Wood Wheel. So I took that.
Okay.
Yeah. So now, yeah. Yeah. So a big Bun B UGK fan. So I took that. And I always say, people ask me, and the joke is, I'm conservative with my money, but I'm liberal with my love. That's what I always tell people. But the concept of the conservative liberal show is that we understand that through society, that there's two sides. You know, we have other political groups or whatever else, but there's mainly two sides. So the goal is to let both sides speak. I don't support candidates, though I've had judges on my show, people running for office. I don't support candidates. I want to allow you to have this conversation, and let's talk about what I believe some of the issues are. So you can be a Republican, Democrat, Independent, whatever, but let's talk about it so my audience can be educated by you. As a media personality, I have a responsibility to facilitate the truth as best as possible, to facilitate the story, and I don't have a lot of opinions. My goal is just to facilitate it.
So yeah, that's what I thought when I saw the conservative liberal. I was like, what is he going for here?
Yeah.
Is that meaning he's just showing that he's open to discussion and dialogue with both sides? Because it's interesting that you went for the conservative liberal, which is more of the philosophical, intellectual background rather than Democrat and Republican.
Yeah.
Republican. Those are how things manifest themselves in voting practices, but underneath those are conservative and liberal ideologies. So that is something that you want to continue to pursue, and having people from the various political spectrum to discuss key issues?
Yeah, politics, but it didn't start out politics. I had an opportunity. I had a co-host that came on, Coretta Brown, and she was so into doing that type of work. So I was like, it was election time. And like you were saying, I didn't know, though I listened about politics, I didn't know the steps. So here's another girl who she's formerly incarcerated. So she came in and she educated me, and she brought these guests that educated the population. Because the population that listens to me are formerly incarcerated. Mothers, daughters, cousins, brothers, sisters, aunts are formerly incarcerated or currently incarcerated. People that are in the community, some of these political individuals listen to my radio show. So it was the fact of I have an audience that's an active audience that desires results, that desires information. Not somebody that want to entertain. I entertain a little bit, but I'm not an entertainer. My goal is to facilitate the information as best as possible to help those understand, but also to spark interest for you to serve. Because I serve through the radio, I serve through the podcast. So let's let you serve in the areas that you can, because there are opportunities out there for you to use your gift as well.
Well, ideally, that is what a media personality or journalism is supposed to do, is be a medium through which the ideas are displayed, argued, discussed out into the public, rather than put too much of your own ideological spin on the results, as they come out. Ideally, that's what the way it ought to be, that you facilitate and that you encourage discussion. So how does this play into what you're doing now with the cognitive justice?
So Cognitive Justice International is an organization that we're building right now. I want to serve. Like, I learned about God and things in prison, but I learned through service. I didn't learn through knowledge because I didn't know what to read. So I learned through being an usher, being promoted to the head usher, or Toastmaster. I learned how to serve in prison. I was a crack dealer at 13, 14 years old. I made more money than my mama at 15 years old. And that wasn't service. So I learned how to serve, and I have to. Some people talk about getting away. I have to maintain a service heart, because if I don't, I'm no good to nobody. My daughter, I'm no good to nobody. If I don't maintain that, I'm gonna mess up. I'm gonna do some things. So it's me keeping myself in check, like the person that's going to Alcoholics Anonymous, whatever else. So Cognitive Justice came about. I was looking years ago. I wanted to do a conference for formerly incarcerated people. We were going to do it at St. John's Church, and just fell apart. Things happened. People moved around, and I was at Tom Bass trying to get healthy. And I said, man, 3 years ago I was going to do a conference, and man, that's really been about 3.5, 4 months ago, and everything has happened in 3.5, 4 months. So I was looking for a name, and I was like, justice awareness, this, because my businesses are cognitive, everything, Cognitive Media Group, Cognitive Enterprise, Cognitive Publishing. Those are my businesses, and it's cognitive with a K because I just love what the word means. And so I was like, I got to get away from cognitive. I want to do something else. And so I said, let me just put cognitive justice in. Cognitive justice is a concept that was birthed from a professor in India. And basically, cognitive justice is the approach to solve problems through results and connecting agencies and communities together to be able to do those results. So if you have a trucking business and you say you want to have a cognitive justice approach, you don't have to necessarily give your money, give your time, which is what we do already. But it's to solve the problem. It's not to come together and have meetings. So it's a results and solutions-based approach to age-old issues. My issue just has to be juvenile justice, immigration youth, youth aging out of foster care, women in criminal justice. I don't know what to call this one, but men that come from prison or tough environments and helping them deal with themselves emotionally. So it's just an approach that is solutions-based. And Harris County Precinct 1 believed in it so much that they got behind me. And for our conference that happened December 11th, they approved a building for me, and one of their better buildings, free of charge.
Yeah. What are some of the activities that are going to go on there?
So one thing is awards. We're giving out awards, and it's not going to be the Puff Daddy Suge Knight Awards, but we're going to give out awards to community-based individuals. And this is breaking news. We're going to give awards out throughout the year, not just the Cognitive Justice Conference time. And the kids are going to present the awards to the individuals. So we have an award going out to, they don't know, breaking news again if they see this, but Dav Lewis and Roshan, they have a group called Black Man Heal. There's nothing like it. Well, now throughout the country and throughout the world, Black men come on this Zoom call once a month, and they talk about what they've been through, and they help each other heal. People don't know about that. So I want to give them the social award, but the kids are going to present the award on site to them somewhere. We're going to record it. We're going to talk about immigration youth. Immigration youth being like what they're going through, how can they get problem solved? Because one of the goals of cognitive justice is to have resources. So we're going to present with lawyers. They can be we have some hopefully from the public defender's office, but some also may come from the district attorney's office. And so we'll talk about immigration for youth, going to school, the doctor, and that's beyond me. I know nothing about that.
Right.
Children aging out of foster care. We're going to talk about that and talk about the resources. And some people ask me, well, that's kind of heavy stuff. These kids been going through heavy stuff their entire life.
Yeah.
I won't talk down to them. I want them to understand that there are people fighting for them. I'm fighting, but you're also going to have an opportunity to fight for yourself through this new knowledge and information that you'll get. So that's kind of some of the focuses that we'll have. Children aged out of foster care, immigration youth, and justice involved kids, which I was a justice involved kid. And there's so much going on in juvenile justice in a sense. Things, especially Harris County, is opening up to a program like Credible Messenger, where formerly incarcerated men or women are justice impacted. Doesn't mean that you have to go to jail, but justice impacted means you were born and raised in Sunnyside. And excuse me, somebody that you know went to jail.
Yeah, and Credible Messengers is the name of this, right?
So Credible Messengers is that program.
Okay.
Is that program. So we'll have a representative for Credible Messengers there, and we're gonna have just community-based individuals. We're going after the bigger sponsors as well. But right now we have about 30 community-based individuals that have committed to the role and their role in Cognitive Justice International.
So Harris County, Precinct 1, December 11th.
December 11th.
You're going to have issues or representatives from groups like Black Men Heal. Is that the first
We're
one?
going to give them an award. So Black Men, so those individuals.
Immigration, foster care, aging out of foster care, and some of the issues that surround that. And then the Credible Messengers. And that one's just for me and, the group that I help when I'm coming out of Huntsville. That's something that I think will catch. That one of the things that, guys in prison often want to do is help the youth. That's it's surprising to me when I speak to people who have either not had any real engagement with people who have been locked up or justice involved, that they're shocked that people in prison want to give back or help the communities. And that is a common theme that I run into. And when they talk about helping and giving back, it is usually directed at youth.
Sure.
So I think this is a great and interesting, and I've not heard anything similar thus far. So that's something that I'm interested to see, how that goes in the future. I've studied social justice, criminal justice, intergenerational justice. I had never heard of cognitive justice in particular. So that's one that I'm going to have to look up. That I may have.
You may have it here.
I may have it. I just ain't heard of it. But I got the other justices all up there. So that's cool. I'm looking forward to checking that out. So what now? Cognitive justice is going to be in December. Where do you see yourself, going into the future?
Of course, I would love to stay and retire, get this good Harris County insurance. But I think
that's right. By the way, that job is going to be cool. I want you to keep me up to date on how all that's going.
I will. But I do have we talked the other day about the reentry book.
Yeah.
So hopefully around September it'll be finished. And hopefully published maybe around November. So it's basically called Reentry Goals. It's the steps to reentry. Reentry starts the moment that you enter the jail, not when you get ready to come home or not when you're released. So focus on reentry from that standpoint. And I think cognitive justice is a legacy project. I often tell some close people to me that I may do one or two great things in my life, and my daughter's already here, so that's kind of there. But this is like a legacy project. I've been able to put passion in and get people to buy into it. When you get people to buy into stuff that they really don't understand, but they see you and they believe in you and they say, okay, if you're behind it, then we're okay. I think that's just a testament of the people that put the good things, put the belief in me that I could do these things, because there was a time I didn't know, I didn't even understand like what I wanted to do. My goal in prison was to come home and make $10 an hour. I thought that was the ultimate thing initially. So just really being thankful, man, for the people that have like poured into my life, that have invested in me, and I desire to give them a return on their investment. So cognitive justice is kind of one of those things for the people, coaches, from being a kid, from however old I was all the way to now. it's like me repaying society, because it's a legacy project to me, but it's something that I give to our justice impacted communities. And not just in Houston, the goal is for it to go everywhere. So because people poured into me, I'm able to pour into this project, but hopefully, and God willing, this project could be able to pour into others that can then start pouring into their community.
Sounds like wisdom. Sounds like you're working out wisdom in the world by giving back and leaving a legacy for others. And it's one of the most meaningful things to have a young person, or not even necessarily a young person, but just some other person tell you that you benefited them or had some sort of a positive, influence on their life and their thoughts. You never know what people are listening to or paying attention to, but all of the effort that we put into it pays off in the long run. I think a lot of people will appreciate cognitive justice.
Thank you.
Well, thanks, Damion.
Yes, sir.
All right, it's been a pleasure.
Yes, sir. Thank you.